People pay good money to see this movie. When they go out to a theater, they want cold sodas, hot popcorn, and no monsters in the projection booth.
Everyone pretend podcasting isn't boring.
Turn it off. Turn it off.
Hey folks, welcome to a special episode of The Projection Booth. I'm your host, Mike White. On this episode, I'm talking with author Brian Raftery about his new book, Hannibal Lector, A Life. It is a biography of sorts of Hannibal Lecter, his conception, his interpretations by the, four main actors that have played him over the years, all of those different interpretations and how they've been brought to the screen, what they were like in book form. Really great book. I listened to the audio version of it, which Mr. Raftery narrates, and he did a great job with that. Whether you're reading it or listening to it, highly recommend Hannibal Lector, A Life. Check it out. And I hope you enjoy this interview.
Where are you based out of? Are you in LA? Are you?
No, I'm just outside of Detroit.
Oh, okay, that's right. Yeah. Cool. That's awesome. Congrats on doing this for so long. It's great.
Well, thanks. I appreciate it. Yeah, you're a little bit of a podcaster yourself.
I had a phase. I dipped in. I did a couple of shows. Dipped out. I'll hopefully do some more. That Ringer era, that contract kind of wound down, and I'm not sure whether they're still doing narrative shows, but those were really fun to do. It's funny. I had this goofy Robert Redford poster here. I always think of it when I see it. I just saw on your thing. There's a CIA logo up there as part of 3 Days of the Condor, and I always think of it when I had to Zoom with Oliver Stone for those podcasts, because halfway through I was like, wait a minute, does he think maybe I should have kept that out of view? I always forget to move Redford over before I start this. Anyway, but thank you. I hope they'll do some more of those.
Yeah, how did you get involved in entertainment and writing about it and podcasting about it?
It's something I always wanted to do, even when I didn't know I wanted to do it. My parents were both journalists. They both worked at the Philadelphia Inquirer, and my mom was a huge movie fan, and they were both very big readers. So I grew up in a house where multiple newspapers arrived every day, magazines, and then my mom had a lot of film guides. Like she had like a New York, there's a book called The New York Times at the Movies that came out in the late 70s, and it's just a collection. I actually have a copy of it here. It's just like a holiday coffee table book they put out with a bunch of New York Times movie reviews starting, probably in the 30s or 40s and going up to like Star Wars. And I used to just read that look at the print ads. I'd read. I remember I'd get so scared I would skip the ad that had Jaws, because I had a big picture of the shark. So I'd always go from like some Judy Garland movie to The Jazz Singer. I would always skip Jaws. I always knew that page. But I love movies. I watched Siskel and Ebert. I watched a bunch of movies with my mom when I was younger. And I think just being in a house where you could read movie reviews, you could read Rolling Stone profiles of directors or filmmakers. At a certain point, movies and music and television and, to a degree, comic books were just things that I wanted to read about all the time. So that's kind of how this all started in a weird way. I definitely remember in like 5th grade, I was giving entertainment news updates in the class for some daily thing, which is like the nerdiest thing. Like, I cannot believe I did that. But I always loved this stuff. I loved how movies were made. I loved movie reviews. I'm not a critic, but I love watching and reading movie reviews. And so, and because I read movie reviews so frequently, that's kind of how I discovered The Silence of the Lambs for the first time.
Tell me a little bit about your previous book, 1999, the best movie year ever. How did you decide that? Was it just because that was like the year for you, like as far as your age, like that just hit? Or is that something that you saw in retrospect and you're just like, well, gosh, I can't believe all those things just came out all in the same year?
I was in it as it was happening. In 1999, I graduated college and I got my first job, which was an internship at Entertainment Weekly, which became my first job, my proper job later. So I spent that summer just absolutely movie drunk, because it was the first time in my life I was going from like rural Pennsylvania to New York City. So I could go to all these screenings, I could go interview filmmakers. So I was on a really big movie high that year, but also in the offices of Entertainment Weekly, where all these people were much smarter and more experienced, there was a genuine sense that this was a really good movie year, to the point where Entertainment Weekly ran a cover story on how good 1999 had been for movies before the year was over, before even like Magnolia had come out. I mean, it was just something was changing. And so I always knew that year was interesting. I always wanted to write about that year in general, just because there's so much stuff that went on in the culture, whether it was teen pop or, the Y2K hysteria. And what I could do was when I decided to dive into that book, I thought, okay, I can interview all these filmmakers. I interviewed like David Fincher and Steven Soderbergh and Sofia Coppola, and I can interview all these actors and we can talk about how these movies were made. And they're very important movies to these filmmakers, so that I got a lot of them to talk. But what I really wanted to do was also look at sort of where the world was at that point and where filmmaking and the film culture was at that point. And I think, yes, I love the movies of that year. Would I, it's funny, last year I did a whole run of like 1975 movies. I did a year once where I watched nothing but a bunch of like 1969, 1939 movies. And I'll say sometimes I look at the title of my book and think, huh, best movie year ever? I don't know. 1975 was pretty good. 1939 was pretty good. But what that year did was it took all these great movies from the past, whether it was The Graduate or The Wizard of Oz or 70s conspiracy thrillers, and kind of spun them into the future in a way. Like all these filmmakers, all these great movies from 99, whether it was Fight Club or The Matrix or Office Space or Election or The Blair Witch Project, they were all extremely innovative for their time, but they were also building on film history. And also, 99 is like, it's all these classes of filmmakers collide. It's, Stanley Kubrick and George Lucas make their first directed films in more than a decade for both of them. Brad Bird, Sofia Coppola, they all make their first movies. And at the same time, you have like this kind of emerging upper middle class of filmmakers like David Fincher and Soderbergh and David O. Russell, who are given a lot of free reign in that period. So for me, it was, yes, I do love these movies. They're fun to talk about. Who doesn't want to write about the making of Fight Club or Office Space or The Matrix? But I also felt like that period for Hollywood and for the country and for popular culture was kind of a fascinating time to look back on.
Yeah, as a film snob, I am not supposed to like Entertainment Weekly, but I will tell you it was my Bible for years and years and years, and just like would pour over every issue, read it cover to cover, just absolutely loved it. It was just such a thrill every time a new issue would come out.
Mine too. And I actually found something I wrote for my college newspaper in the mid 90s where it was like, I'd write a little mini biography for our website. And I'd forgotten about this till a year or so ago. I wrote that like my dream was to one day write one article for Entertainment Weekly. Like, I loved Entertainment Weekly. So to be able to go there, work there for 4 years, I mean, it was a remarkable place to be. It just felt like I I was describing this to someone else. There's a scene in The Simpsons where Bart heads into the offices of Mad Magazine and he opens the door and like Alfred E. Newman's there and there's sound effects going off. And that to me was like when I went through the doors of Entertainment Weekly, I was like, oh my gosh, there's all these incredibly smart, very cool, very opinionated film and music and TV and book experts. And I was like, I could not believe I got to kind of walk among them. So yeah, I'm very fond of Entertainment Weekly. It was the best job I ever had. I still talk to someone that I worked with there basically almost every day for almost 25 years plus now at this point. Yeah, it was a good time. It was a really fun time to be young and obsessed with pop culture and living in New York City and working at Entertainment Weekly.
What's your day job these days, or do you have one, or is it just writing?
It's just I'm freelance now. I do copywriting. I'm sort of in between things right now because I was doing these Ringer podcasts for the last couple of years. So I was doing 1 or 2 Ringer podcasts while working on this book, on the Hannibal Lecter book. So I haven't been able to kind of write that many freelance articles or really reach out more. So I'm jumping back into freelance writing in a big way. So which has been fun. And hopefully I'll start figuring out another book in the next couple of weeks that I want to do.
Tell me about Hannibal Lecter Life. What even brought you to this project?
Well, I always loved The Silence of the Lambs. And I have a long running strange relationship with this movie in that I first heard about it when I was I still remember this, when I was in 8th grade. I was sitting in the back of my Spanish class. I was not a good student, surprisingly, but I would bring in Mad Magazine or comic books or Premiere. I would bring in movie magazines and kind of read them in the back of class. And I was reading Rolling Stone and I read Peter Travers' review of The Silence of the Lambs, which was a rave and was very detailed. And I normally never read reviews that detailed until I saw the movie, but I started reading this and I was like, wait, what is this? Like, I mean, I'd heard of the book, but I was only 14 or 15. I was not reading it. And I was like, wait a minute. So there's a horror movie about a cannibal and serial killers, and it's really good. I was just so used to that point to either, slashers, which I loved, but were never, they were never written about in Rolling Stone magazine for like 2,000 words or whatever. Or, I was used to kind of like really ridiculous TV movie of the week serial killer films. So when I read that review, I was like, oh my gosh, I've got to see The Silence of the Lambs, which I absolutely did not because I was terrified of it. I did not see it in the theater. I did not see it until it came out on VHS, maybe 92, 93. And from the minute I saw it, I was really kind of obsessed with it. It became, it was Silence of the Lambs was the first movie I ever listened to a commentary track for. Like I found it was the first movie I ever watched on Laserdisc, I think. I worked at a video store in the 90s, which was the greatest job. Aside from Entertainment Weekly, a video store job in the 90s is the greatest job of all time. So I stayed one night and I transferred our Laserdisc copy of The Silence of the Lambs to VHS, so I have it on widescreen, and then I copied it, I think, again with the commentary track. I had 2 copies of it. So I was always fascinated by this movie. I can't say I fully grasped what was so great about it at the age of 15 or 16. It's just like a cool, scary, dark movie. But in the last 30 plus years, I've rewatched it every couple of years. And to me, The Silence of the Lambs is it's just the ultimate renewable resource of a movie. Every time I watch it, I catch something new. And so I always want to write a book about it. I thought about that in early 2020. The pandemic kind of slowed things down. And then my editor and my agent and we all just started having these separate conversations about this again. And my editor at Simon & Schuster, who's a really smart guy, said, why are you making this just about The Silence of the Lambs? What about Hannibal Lecter? I mean, this character has been in all these different films. The TV show is obviously huge. The books are still bestsellers. So we decided together, we kind of came with this idea of, let's look at Hannibal Lecter from a couple of directions. One is, how is he created? How are these books written? And how are these movies made? Really getting into the granular of how these things came together. Who was Tom Harris, this creator who no one really knows? I mean, Tom Harris is like one of the most successful literary recluses of all time. But also looking at the idea of Hannibal Lecter, despite being a vicious, top-killing man-eater, how has he kind of become like this beloved anti-hero? And how does that tie into how we feel about serial killers in popular culture in the last 30 plus years? So there was a lot of stuff to dig into. And it was, for me, the idea, what made it really fun was the actual kind of granular, like I said, like how was this movie made, going back into the researching of Tom Harris, going into the publishing industry, the TV industry, the movie industry. That was really, really fun to research and learn about, but also trying to figure out this bigger picture of how much of the crime-based popular culture that I've consumed in the last 35 plus years is a result of Silence of the Lambs. And why do we kind of feel a weird attraction to serial killers in popular culture when in real life they're repulsive, So that it was kind of mixing together a lot of on screen, on the page, and real world elements that was really interesting to me, or made it seem compelling to me.
I mean, you're setting yourself up for such disappointment when it comes to having to write about Tom Harris. Like, oh, let me write about J.D. Salinger's personal life or Tom Pynchon and what he's up to these days. I mean, it must have been such a struggle for you to just find all these quotes and try to gather all this information. And then are you trying to track down people that he knew and could talk to them as well?
Reporting on Tom Harris for this book was the most frustrating and the most exciting aspect of it, because we all knew we were never going to get him to talk. So Tom Harris has given 3 interviews, formal on the record interviews, since 1975. That's not a lot to work with. And one was in 1975 and 2 were in 2019. And there's not a whole lot. Like there's not a whole lot in there. So I knew I would have very little primary resources to work with, which is kind of fun. I mean, because it means that I'm learning as I work on this. So that's the fun part of doing this kind of research. I lucked out in a couple of ways. One is that the interviews that he did give were pretty substantive. I mean, were pretty substantial. He gave Q&As. He did a long public access interview in 2019. So there was stuff where I could at least hear his voice and get his exact quotes and his exact recollections on particular events or how he created certain things. I also lucked out in that even though a lot of his former peers and collaborators have sadly passed away, and some of them passed away while I was working on the book, there are people that he came in touch with. One of his former book editors, 2 of the female FBI agents that he met with while researching the Clarice Starling character. I also lucked out in that Jonathan Demme, who directed The Silence of the Lambs, even though Tom Harris really kept a very, very safe distance from Hollywood, he clearly really liked Jonathan Demme. He clearly really liked Ed Saxon, who was Jonathan Demme's producing partner. So Jonathan Demme's archives at the University of Michigan, there are faxes and letters from Harris, which I don't think anyone's ever really seen in the last 30, 40 years, They're not super long. Some of them are honestly just cartoons or restaurant recommendations, but there was just enough in there to feel as though I got a little bit of an idea, and a little bit of an idea of who he was. And for a project like this, anything I could find was useful. Even if I cut some stuff, I wanted every scrap. And ultimately, I found out a lot about Tom Harris, but what I think kind of worked in the end is that I had to be very careful. I don't want to compare Tom Harris to Hannibal Lecter for all kinds of litigious reasons, but they are somewhat similar. I mean, they're both these very incredibly smart, globe-trotting guys with kind of highly refined tastes who disappear for long, long periods and who are never fully known, even by some people who know them. So that was kind of interesting. I mean, how much of Hannibal Lecter's autobiography of Tom Harris? I imagine maybe in some small ways. I don't think, I don't want to accuse Tom Harris of being cannibal, but I do think there are some really interesting similarities. And just to be able to learn more about someone who's written, you know, huge bestsellers, but also arguably two or three of the best popular novels of the last 100 years was really fun. It was everything I learned, every little scrap was still rewarding.
How do you approach a project like this? Do you just start making a list of like, here's all the people I need to talk to or try to talk to? Obviously you've got the actual ephemera of the books, the movies, those kind of things, but just how do you decide like this is where I'm going to dive in and at what point?
I mean, for a project like this, and the way I approach most projects is I first figure out what the structure is going to be, which in this case was fairly easy because it's going to start with Tom Harris and it's going to go through his career. And it's going to go through all these major projects, whether it's the Manhunter film, the Hannibal TV series. It's going to go all through them in chronological order, basically. You can't really jump around. And then what I did was I just made a huge list of everyone from each of these projects that was a priority to me who was still with us. And then I just was lucky enough that I got a lot of them. I spoke with Michael Mann. I spoke with Brian Cox. I spoke with Ted Talley, who wrote the Silence of the Lambs screenplay. I spoke with Ed Saxon. There were certain actors I got. And I knew there was going to be some people that I probably wasn't going to get. I knew I was going to get Tom Harris. I knew I wasn't going to get Hopkins, frankly, because he was working on his own memoir. I didn't get Jodie Foster, which surprised me, and which was a year and a half of frustrating emails that went nowhere, but whatever. I mean, I found easily over 150 interviews with her, and I could pull from that. But the real fun for me is finding people that I'd never heard of that are part of this story and actually tracking them down. One of my favorite interviews, maybe my favorite interview of the whole project, was in Tom Harris's Lecter novels. There's a woman named Athena Varunas who is thanked in the back pages. Tom Harris does not thank a lot of people in his books. So I was like, well, who is Athena Varunas? And then I found her name in a fax from Tom Harris to Jonathan Demme as an FBI agent he spoke with to help develop the Clarice Starling character. So I was like, I have to find this person and at least see if she'll talk to me. As it turns out, she knew Harris very well, stayed in touch with him, became friends with him all through the 80s and 90s and even in the 2000s. And she was wonderful. I spoke to her for 2 hours. She sent me a lot of her material from Harris. She had great stories. So someone like that, who is someone I hadn't even heard of before I started this project, became an invaluable source. And she's great. And I think she's working on her own memoir, which I'm hoping she publishes because she has so many great FBI stories that I couldn't fit into the book. So it's just a matter of like, at a certain point, you just have a giant Google Doc of names, and then it becomes a whiteboard of the names that you're still trying to get. And I think for this book, I think I only did like 40 or 50 interviews for this book. I think the 99 book I did something like 130. This one was different because, as I said, unfortunately, a lot of people had passed away. I was talking to Roger Corman's assistant a couple of weeks before he passed away because he's in the Silence of the Lambs, and I wanted to talk to him about that. And he was, one of Denny's early mentors. So there was a couple people I really wanted to speak to who unfortunately were not with us anymore. But that's the beauty of archival research, and you can go through commentary tracks and old newspaper stories and magazine articles that aren't online. And you just you that's another thing you do early on is you go on eBay and you buy every magazine story from the 90s about Jodie Foster, Anthony Hopkins, because 90% of them are not going to be online, and they're going to have really great stuff you can't find elsewhere. And even if they don't have great stuff, you want them anyway, so you can read them and you won't be wondering 6 months later, oh, was there something in that story I should track down?
And speaking of archives, you mentioned the archive at U of M for Demme. Did you come out here to Ann Arbor?
It was a blast. I spent 5 days. They gave me access to about 12 or 13 boxes of Silence of the Lambs material. For people who don't know, I mean, that university has Orson Welles papers, Robert Altman's, it's a fantastic film library there. And the people there were amazing. I got the sense that the boxes had not been fully processed yet or only lightly processed. And there was so much amazing stuff. I mean, you come in on a Wednesday morning and pick up a box, and then, 20% of it's just stuff you don't need. But then, like I said, there's a fax from Tom Harris, or there's a bunch of contact sheets. I think Demi had a photographer on the set of Silence of the Lambs almost every day, which is wild. And they're really great photos. And they've never been published. They're just, it's just behind the scenes with Hannibal Lecter and Clarice Starlin. And then I also found, the most fun stuff was, one of the things I found was this thick Xerox, that was this very thick fax that was basically a transcript of Anthony Hopkins appearing on a Los Angeles morning radio show after Silence of the Lambs came out. And it's kind of like a Zoo Crew show where these guys are like, just like, we love Hannibal Lecter, he's so great. And I'm reading it, and at one point, like, this woman calls in and she's like, could you say my name as Hannibal Lecter? And I was like, oh my gosh, like this, that audio is gone forever, probably. It's like, I would not have found that had a publicist not had a transcript ordered of that radio interview. So stuff like that is so much fun. And it's one of those things where you almost wish that you're working on this with a partner, because you just want to turn to them and say, like, oh my God, I can't believe I found this. So my poor editor, who's incredibly kind, I was always emailing him like the most, like, I'm like, oh my God, I just found this faction, blah, 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 blah. He's like, great. Okay. How's the book coming? I mean, it's like, I don't need to update him with every granular aspect of it, but the research is so much fun. And for anyone such as yourself or other movie fans, I remember when I came back and my friend was like, well, how is it? How was your research trip? And I was like, I want everyone I know who loves a movie to have the opportunity to walk into a room where they say, hey, you know that one movie you've been obsessed with for decades? Here's 13 boxes that tell you everything you want to know. I mean, it was such, as a real hardcore movie nerd and lover since birth, basically, it was a fucking blast. It was so much fun.
Were you ever tempted to say, you know what, I changed my mind, I'm just going to focus on Silence of the Lambs again?
No, because I always knew at a certain point that the making of Silence of the Lambs and the reception to it and its legacy was going to be the middle of the book. But I also knew that, in the last 10 years, especially, Manhunter has become such a crucial movie for young movie fans. And I knew that Hannibal, the TV show, has a remarkably large and loyal fan base. So I knew that I couldn't ignore all these other great Hannibal Lecter stories. And I also knew, frankly, Hannibal Rising, which is a book and a movie that did not do well, the story behind that to me is just as interesting as some of the stories behind these. I mean, I'm interested in things that don't work. I'm interested in Brett Ratner's Red Dragon remake and what was going on the set there, where Brett Ratner, takes over this giant franchise. I mean, all the sort of maybe like the lesser ranked Lecter stories were equally as interesting to me.
What was the most surprising thing you found while you're doing your research on this?
One was just sort of a big picture thing, which was part of the book is looking at this idea of true crime and how we've always had it with us, but why in the 90s after Silence of the Lambs did we have this kind of serial killer as pop culture explosion, which I was aware of. I lived through it. I mean, I remember when Spin Magazine, another great magazine I love, got the right for, I remember in the mid 90s, they put Charles Manson on the cover. I remember watching movies like California and Natural Born Killers and Seven and Copycat, like opening weekends. I don't think I'd really kind of put together how quickly Silence of the Lambs influenced kind of big screen serial killer culture. But also, as I was researching true crime and actual crimes throughout America in the last 50, 60 years and going through newspaper archives just to fact check something here or there, just the sheer number of unsolved murders that are just on page 2 or page 3 that have never become big cases, it's heartbreaking. I mean, you kind of look at, if you pick up any newspaper from the 70s in America, just scan a couple pages, you're going to see a lot of violence and a lot of it's murder that's clearly was never solved, never became, something, a national scandal. And that's really, really heartbreaking and honestly kind of scary at times. Not that I'm naive about how much violence goes on. So that was kind of, there were definitely days where I would wake up and I would have at like 5 o'clock to start working. And I'd open up my laptop and there was like some serial killer newspaper story for the night before. And I was just like, oh God, like I do not want to start my day with this. But that said, there were also really fun things. I mean, in the archives, one of my favorite things was on the next to last day, or maybe last day, I was going through these boxes and there was a box just marked publicity, which I kind of stayed till the end because I was like, well, it's a bunch of articles. If I can't make it through, I'll leave this one unread. And I opened it and lo and behold, inside, buried in the back of this box, was a tiny white envelope that said Best Director. And I was like, what the hell is this? But I opened it up, and indeed, it's the announcement of Jonathan Demme's Best Director Oscar, which is cool to see. Like, and I think his Academy Award ticket's in there. And then out of that envelope falls this other small envelope that's really like a little piece of stationery. I open it up. It's on stationery, personal stationery, and it says, "Dear Jonathan, for once the Best Picture of the Year actually won. Congratulations, Steven Spielberg." And I was like, "Oh my gosh! Like, this has been sitting in the back of a box for 30 plus years. Maybe someone's seen it, but it was kind of yellowed and full. It had been clearly important to him, and he put it away, wanted to make sure it's preserved. But it was just kind of in this floating between these boxes or these folders. So stuff like that. After you've spent 2 or 3 hours finding nothing and wondering if you're going crazy, to find something like that is always like, it just keeps you going. And it's, again, the research is the fun for all of these things. I don't love writing. The researching is great.
Well, it's interesting with a project like this. You've been around since Red Dragon came out. I imagine you being a movie nerd like me, you're probably watching the Oscars in 91, seeing that whole sweep, and you've been around through the release of all of these other projects. Must be a little bit of a trip down memory lane for you as well.
It is, yeah. I mean, and it's funny you mentioned the Oscars, because one aspect of this that I could not wait to report on was the Oscar ceremony in 1992 for the movies of 1991, because I loved and still love to this day. I love Billy Crystal as an Oscar host. I get how corny some of those songs are. I get how schmaltzy they are. I do not care at all. I would rather have Billy Crystal singing ridiculous song parodies for 10, 15 minutes than have to watch Ryan Reynolds earnestly hand out a cinematography. I mean, like, no offense to Ryan Reynolds. I don't know why I picked him. But, like, you know what I mean? Like, I love those. So I was like, oh my gosh, I have to talk to Billy Crystal about coming out as Hannibal Lecter. He was the one person I never heard back from his publicist, and I was so bummed not to talk to him. But I also knew that I wanted to talk to Bruce Valanche, who famously wrote all these Oscar shows, and he was delightful. I mean, he has very clear memory of working on that ceremony. So stuff like that, where I think another writer might say the 1992 Oscars with Billy Crystal doing Hannibal Lecter. Why is that part of this book? To me, that's an opening scene. Like, that's something that's like, I'm like, no, to me, because I love that. And it is a trip down memory lane. That is a very important part of showing how this movie plugged into popular culture. And as you can probably guess, I only needed to watch maybe 14 minutes total of that ceremony. Did I watch all 3.5 hours of it on YouTube with commercials? Probably. Yes. I will say yes. I will confess to that. So I love that kind of stuff. And yeah, I mean, I don't really want to traffic in nostalgia too much, but I obviously, when I've written about history or done podcasts about film history, most of the time, the films I'm writing about or talking about overlap with my lifetime in some way. I'm just trying to kind of give them a bigger context for them, or kind of find a narrative for them that I didn't realize at the time. Maybe people didn't realize. So this was certainly the kind of thing where I was like, well, I know these movies pretty well. I know these books fairly well. What don't I know? What have I not learned about this character and all these great films and books? So that's the fun for me,
Well, it's very nice for me as a reader to either be reminded or really kind of get the backstory for a lot of these things, like all the rights and all of the rigmarole around Dino De Laurentiis and who owns the characters versus this versus that. Oh my God, that whole thing. It's like, I'm surprised you didn't do a whole book about the Clarice TV series. Clarice couldn't be in the Hannibal TV show because her rights are different than his rights.
The legal battle over Hannibal Lecter in the 90s and 2000s is so complicated and so protracted that I eventually just cut almost all. I reference it, but I sort of felt as though if I get into the weeds on which company owned this, I was like, I don't know if people, you and I care. Like, I think a lot of people would just kind of zone out, but it's fascinating to me. What really, the part that I do go into that I love about Hannibal Lecter as a piece of IP is the fact that Dino De Laurentiis was his, shepherd and caretaker for many years. And I love Dino De Laurentiis. And that was another fun rabbit hole, was for people who don't know who he was. I think most of your listeners know who he was, but he was this very famously famous Italian film producer for decades and decades. And he worked on everything from like high art to like King Kong remakes. But at one, Manhunter came about partly because in the 80s, Dino De Laurentiis wanted to build this new kind of Hollywood in North Carolina. He built this giant studio, which I would love to go back in time and see. And he did it partly because of the tax, like it was not very labor friendly, I'd say, in terms of unions and stuff like that. And so that's probably why Manhunter was shot partly in North Carolina, like on a soundstage. And I loved, and his up and down with Lecter, his disappointment over Red Dragon, his fights with Michael Mann. He didn't want anything to do with the Silence of the Lambs movie, so he kind of gave up the rights for a little bit of money, which seems like a bad idea, but actually, once the movie got so big, Dino still owned the character, so he got so much money off Hannibal. I mean, the Hannibal 2001 movie and the TV show, I'm sure which came on, years later, was very good for the Dino De Laurentiis company. I mean, he wound up winning, but he is a fascinating character, just a guy with, like with a cigar in his mouth, like old school Hollywood legend. So I wanted to keep him. I just couldn't get into the suits and countersuits of all the Hannibal Lecter ownership because I think people would have, and it's confusing. I mean, there's articles from the time where a lawyer is even being quoted as saying, this is a very confusing IP case. And I was like, if it's confusing for a lawyer, I'm not going to understand it. Neither will the readers, I think.
I didn't realize that until I was listening to you narrate your book. Didn't realize that Hannibal made more money than Silence of the Lambs. That's crazy to me.
Yeah, and I mean, it's obviously 10 years later, it's adjusted, I guess, a little bit for inflation. But no, I mean, Hannibal, the 2001 film, was this huge blockbuster. I mean, it was covered, and it was also covered. You were probably, I'm sure, you were definitely online the same time as I was. It was covered online at the peak of that kind of Ain't It Cool News, Dark Horizons, like people snapping photos from Italy and leaking them online. It was kind of like it was one of those first movies where they kind of had to figure out how to manage the online press because everyone, all of a sudden, there's all these photos of Anthony Hopkins as Lecter because that's how big the movie. I mean, it was super anticipated. The whole '90s. If you read any article about Jodie Foster or Hannibal, or if you read any article in the '90s about Jodie Foster, Jonathan Demme, or Anthony Hopkins, no matter what movie they're promoting or what they're talking about, the Silence of the Lambs sequel is a question they get, and they keep talking about it like we want it to happen, we want it to happen. And there was a huge demand, and MGM, which I think ultimately got part of the rights, they saw this as like a James Bond franchise. They saw this as like a real viable kind of, we can knock out as many of these movies as we want. It didn't turn out that way. They did try to do that. I mean, various studios worked on the Lecter films and kind of overdid it. But that movie was a total blockbuster, and one thing I didn't realize till the very end of writing the book, when I went back and did some extra research, was Donald Trump and Melania went to the premiere of Hannibal in New York City. And Donald Trump apparently couldn't watch the scene where Ray Liotta gets his brains eaten. I'm sorry to spoil the movie for anyone listening. It's 25 years old. So it had a huge pop cultural impact at the time. And I don't know how it's viewed now. I mean, have you watched that movie recently, or what did you think of that movie?
I probably was there opening weekend. I remember being pretty disappointed, and it just has gotten, in my memory, it just gets worse every time I think about it. Revisiting it with your book, I was just like, yeah, no. Then I remember with the book of Hannibal that my wife threw it across the room when she was done with it. She was so disgusted by that ending. And I remember reading that and being like, okay, I can see why she threw it across the room. And then, yeah, the ending of the movie, kind of having to change that just to make it a little bit more palatable. Sorry for all the food references, but it didn't do it.
Her response was not an uncommon response. I mean, Hannibal, the book, what's so fascinating is you're talking about Entertainment Weekly. I remember this in 1999 I was still in college, I think, still at school, waiting to graduate. Entertainment Weekly put Hannibal Lecter on the cover because the book had just been announced, and that's how big it was. And what's really interesting about that year is the two of the biggest pop cultural releases of 1999 are Hannibal the novel and The Phantom Menace. And they're both like these long-awaited, like the return of these bad guys we all love. And both Hannibal the novel and The Phantom Menace the movie are things I wanted to love so badly. And then every 5 years, I will go back and be like, let me give it another shot. Like I'm looking, maybe you know what that is because you're a fan too, but like, I don't know what drives this compulsion among fans, including myself, when something doesn't work, to just want to will it into a better existence. And I will say, there's a lot of things about Phantom Menace now that I legitimately think are really great. And people who are much younger than me love it without any kind of qualms. But Hannibal the novel, I reread it twice while working on this book, and both times I'm like, there's so much good stuff here when does it start going, wow, this is actually better than oh yeah, I forgot about this. It's like, and it is that ending, and it's the first 100 pages and the last 50 pages are just kind of kibosh the whole thing. And there's stuff in between doesn't work either. But yeah, having Hannibal basically drug and kind of coerce and seduce Clarice Starling. In 1999, it was vulgar and kind of gross. In 2026, it's like truly offensive. It's shockingly offensive.
I just can't believe it's been 35 years since Silence of the Lambs. That's crazy to me.
And it is wild how long that movie has stayed in the culture. I took one of my kids to go see Anaconda a few weeks ago, which, whatever. I did not love it, but God bless everyone involved. And there's a Silence of the Lambs joke, and they don't even say the name of the movie. They just make a lotion in the basket joke. And then last year in Naked Gun, there's like a Hannibal Lecter joke out of nowhere. And I was like, and I was in a crowd with like teenagers, me and my family, a bunch of, I was like, do any of these kids, know who this is? And then it got a laugh. So somehow Hannibal Lecter is still recognizable, even if he haven't, even if his best work on the big screen, at least, is many, many decades behind.
Oh yeah, that's right. The guy comes out of when he backs into the jail wall and all the prisoners come out and there's a guy with the, very Garland Green from Con Air, but yes, 100% Hannibal Lecter.
Yeah, and my kids know Hannibal Lecter is because they've watched Saturday Night Live. They love Saturday Night Live, and there was a couple of parodies after Trump was talking about Lecter. So for a character who is, especially in his early books, early films, barely exists, and who takes these long, long breaks from the culture, he's still weirdly everywhere. It's kind of a remarkable run. He's had a good run for someone who's supposedly late great Hannibal Lecter.
It's so ironic that we're speaking today because I saw a cartoon this morning on Instagram where it was scientists trying to resurrect or to bring fictional characters into reality because Donald Trump wanted to have dinner with Hannibal Lecter.
They've done a lot for each other brand wise. I'm not entirely sure if for the best, but it's, I don't know. I'm at a loss to explain some of that relationship. But look, it's not surprising to me that Trump embraced Lecter because there are certain similarities in terms of their love of high-end items, their kind of love of very emotive, mawkish music, but also, the key line about Lecter in the early books is one of the characters says, don't forget, I'm paraphrasing, but one of the characters says, don't forget what Hannibal Lecter loves. He loves chaos. And that's kind of also, I think even Trump supporters, and I'm not one of them, would say the same thing about Trump, that he can really take advantage and weaponize chaos in a way that almost no other figure, fictitious or real in my lifetime, has been able to manage. So yeah, they're and they both had, look, Hannibal Lecter, The Silence of the Lambs and Trump's book, The Art of the Deal, were on the bestseller list around the same time. They're kind of contemporaries in a weird way. No, there's a lot of parallels between those. These are big cultural figures. They were inevitably going to overlap at some point.
So what big cultural icon are you going to take on next?
I don't know. It's funny. I've been trying to think of a follow-up, and I keep thinking, is there a character who has a long lifespan, who is well known, but not so well known that he or she or they have been written about to death? And it's kind of hard. Someone said James Bond, and I said, I love James Bond, but I just feel like I don't know what there is to know. And also, what's left to know about. I don't know what there is to find out about James Bond at this point. Also, that's, how many books is that? How many films is that? Darth Vader is another name someone suggested, but I sort of feel like we know too much about Darth Vader now at this point. So I'm trying to think of a character that could be given kind of a fictitious biography, but it has to be someone who you can say more about them than just who they are. It has to be about the cultural industry, what they kind of represent, why they're still out there, some other story that makes it compelling. Because just, hey, so-and-so was created in blah, blah, blah by blah, 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 and then they made this and that isn't, I don't want to do like a wiki-like kind of biography. So it's a tough one. It's tough. I may have one or two ideas, but I haven't quite landed on one yet.
And I would not be surprised if Hannibal Lecter crossed over into comic books, but I love the musical based on Silence of the Lambs. That's always a treat to listen to.
There's a Silence of the Lambs stage play coming to London this year. So there's been a bunch of different adaptations and parodies. There's, of course, The Silence of the Hams, which I think is a Don DeLuise early 90s movie. I've been asked about a surprisingly high number of times. And I'm like, the person asking must have also worked at a video store in the 90s. Yeah, and I also think this character will come back in some way. And whether that's on screen, whether Tom Harris has one last Lecter novel. I mean, Hannibal Rising came out in 2000, the end of 2006. So it's like 20 years since there's been a Lecter book. You know, the last two Lecter books were kind of announced as surprises, just a few months heads up. So it's possible. Tom Harris is still alive. He's in his 80s. He might have one more Lecter book out there. I'd be really curious what he thinks of that character now and how he feels about his own handling of that character, because I think I get the sense he was very conflicted by the success of The Silence of the Lambs film. That's something that happens so rarely to authors, and for a character to kind of blow up bigger than you ever created, that you kind of can't manage him anymore. It must be a very unique and sometimes frustrating situation.
I love that you kind of track his relationship with Silence of the Lambs as far as, is he going to watch the movie? Is he not going to watch the movie? Did he accidentally see too much? Did he see the trailer? That whole through line of the book is fantastic.
Yeah, it's still unclear to me. He's given differing accounts of whether he watched the movie after it came out. It's still not fully clear what actually happened. But I mean, there's still a myth that he's never seen The Silence of the Lambs. You'll see that on like various trivia sites, and it's like, that guy saw The Silence. Are you kidding? By now, he's seen it.
Brian, I would love to talk with you again sometime because this was so much fun.
Oh, totally. This is great. I would love to. Yeah, let me know anytime you want to talk any specific movie. This has been awesome, man. I really appreciate it. So this is very cool.
Well, I appreciate you and I appreciate your book. It was so much fun to listen to, and I'm going to recommend it to a bunch of people. Also, you helped me at trivia the other night. They were talking about a Welsh-born actor who played presidents twice in the 90s, and whatever reason, I just ran across that part where you're talking about how Anthony Hopkins is Welsh. So I was like, okay, Nixon. I can't remember the other one, John Quincy Adams, but got it for you. So thank you so much.
Anything that boosts visibility of Nixon, which is one of my favorite over-the-top Oliver Stone movies, I'm happy, and I'm happy to help anyone on their trivia night. So if Richard Burton had lived longer, he would have been the Welsh-born actor who played like 10 presidents in the 90s. He would have taken any role, I think, by the last 20 years of his career.
After talking about Exorcist 2 again recently, yes, I agree with you.
I want to tell you, I saw The Devil and John Boorman at Beyond Fest out here, and it's fantastic. Actually, I might bother you. I kind of want to send a copy of the book to David Kittredge, only because I sense he's as interested in movie history the same way I am. But boy, what a great movie! And I've been telling a lot of friends, including some of my former EW colleagues, like, this is such an EW friendly movie. Like, this is the kind of documentary we wanted. So yeah, it's a great film. I hope it gets distributed soon, because I've been talking. I want to see it again, and I hope whoever distributes it does it as a double feature with The Heretic. I think with Exorcist 2, I think that'd be awesome. People would really like that. Yeah, make an event out of it. Everyone I know who's seen it loved it. I don't know a single person who saw it and was mid on it. So it's got really good potential. Movie fans are going to love it.
Well, thank you so much, sir. I really appreciate this.
You got it. And stay in touch. You have my email, or you can get to it's just my name, first name, last name at Gmail. Please stay in touch. I'd love that.
Remember the pen that I saw on the table? I ate it when no one was watching. Now I open my mouth and the pen's here again. Their security's ripe for the botching. I'll use it to pick the lock and mutilate both of these cops. Though it's not Halloween, I've concocted a plan. I'll escape from this prison by wearing a man.
Look what he did to this officer's face. He chewed off his cheeks and he sprayed him with mace. We're all in a tizzy. Oh Jesus, where is he? Oh, where could Hannibal be?
This cop is already dead. It's me.
Get this man to a hospital. He's arrested. He's shaking. He's not gonna make it.
Somebody get me an Oscar for best pony Caesar. Just watch how adeptly I fake it.
Get out of the way if the medics arrive. One's already dead and one's barely alive. Security sucked and now we're all fucked. Oh, where could Hannibal be?
This cop is already dead. You'll see. I'm wearing his face on my head. It's me.
What do I say to a person who just lost his face? I bet you he'll miss it.
The cop has a name. It's Jim Pembry. Now tell him he's fine. He looks terrific.
Look at that blood. We think he's up there, the elevator's roof.
I'm leaving you now. Goodbye and take care. You won't believe this goof.
Fire a shot in his knee. No response. Who the hell can this be?
I've left the building at last. I'm free. This cop is already dead. You see. I'm wearing his face on my head.